Well, guys, it's time to get started. Let's get it started. Thanks. I would like to start today by talking to you about quiz 2. Now, I don't have them all in, but and that's usually why I hold off until they're all in, but it's getting a little late. And first of all, I want to apologize for the software mess up. I got some of these via email. Some of you were actually able to load a document on it, but it didn't open it up in the same way that if the software was at its proper settings, it would have been okay. And so I'm missing 2 of them, and a third one I need to get permission to get to. And so I said, create and submit your essay as a docx or PDF. And what I have trouble with often is that. Oh no, noise pollution. I'll just have to speak louder. But a lot of times when you guys put stuff on Google Docs, I can't get into it because it's on your Google Docs site, and so I have to send, I have to hit a button that says ask permission or tell the sender to give you permission to access this document on their site. And so anyway, that's why I don't like to do Google Docs. But this was a software screw up, and I completely understand. But if you've got such a message, send me back permission, we'll be good. And so this is the prompt I just cut and pasted. Your assignment is to write a 3-paragraph essay on one of the starred works. Don't do Tutankhamun, something from chapter 3 or 5. Paragraph 1, an identification of the artwork that is the subject of your essay. Information such as title, media, date of creation, place of creation, and perhaps even the museum in which it can be found, if relevant. Some of you wrote about the Sphinx. Some of you wrote about the pyramids or the Parthenon. Those places are not in museums, but they moved museums to where those places are. But I wanted to say something about this, and I had a couple of entries. Now I wanted to see the identification in terms of title, size, media. And I think I messed some of you guys up because some of these, especially the Greek pottery, was identified as being the Neolithic painter, for example. And that wasn't the title. So far, we're only seeing a few artists identified. And in fact, for the most part, most of the artwork has been anonymous. That'll change soon. But in these cultures, it was almost unheard of to identify the sculptor or the painter, and even sometimes the builder, although we know that Imhotep was responsible for the pyramids at Giza. And we do know that Ikatenos was responsible for the Parthenon, just say. But at any rate, paragraph 2, sampling of results and browsing through the library. And some of you had some problems with that and wrote me email messages, and that was fine. I'd rather set you on the right path than to torture you with tasks you have trouble completing. But what's in parentheses here was designed to lead you through the appropriate links. Go to the library site, articles, click, full text, click, peer review. The last two are just filters on the articles you can find in the library. So anyway, and describe the interdisciplinary connections you found in your results. And here is my big bad. I didn't count off, unless you completely disregarded the question, but I rated all of these pretty high and did not penalize you, because after just grading a few of these, I realized that we had not gone over the meaning of disciplines. I kind of talked about them a little bit, but I really should have dug into that a little more deeply. And some of you got it. Some of you just boom, but a lot of you didn't. So let me show you. First of all, starred works. Most of you were on the starred works, which means that there's something like this on the PowerPoint slide. If it's not there, you were writing about something that I was not expecting. So that's what I meant by starred works. But get to the point, discipline, and this is out of the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and this is, we're actually looking at the second meaning. A branch of knowledge, typically one studied in higher education. Sociology is a fairly new discipline, in quotes, which is true. Sociology is, and a lot of the human sciences are new. Kind of started psychology, Sigmund Freud, 150 years ago or so. We didn't know what psychology was before that. Similarly, sociology and so on. Similar field of study, branch of knowledge, course of study. And I apologize here because where I cut and paste this, it cheated me out of my spaces between the words. A branch of knowledge, course of study, / subject. And so when I was telling you this is where you find it, a lot of those entries that you found online would say subject. But sometimes those weren't really disciplines too. And so let's talk about academic disciplines. Has the internet been going slow for you guys lately? Me too. I was supposed to go to a meeting, yet this is an aside, but I was supposed to go to a workshop meeting on Zoom yesterday, and it did not it was like it wasn't even there.
All the time, my dad, so we'll just go out for like minutes for no reason.
Yes, exactly. I just wrote him a note, said leave feedback. I wrote hello. I left. I don't know if they haven't had it, but let me make sure. Yeah, on campus. Yeah, you're right, Daniel. Good. Let me make sure I got the right share going. Yeah, that'll work. Good. List of academic disciplines. And see, it's the same thing here. Field of study, branch of knowledge. And that is taught and research at the university level. So that's what I mean. You might have subjects in your list of subjects that might be used car salesman. That's a subject, that's not a discipline. But at any rate, here, this is the list, and it's pretty large. And let me see if I can get a little more screen. There we go. Okay, so we kind of divide the disciplines up into groups. And in this case, at Maryville, we have it as schools, which is, for the most part, a very useful way of grouping disciplines together, especially since we're talking about college and university studies. And in the humanities, we have this: history, language and linguistics, literature, performing arts, philosophy, religion, visual arts. And so we don't always touch on all of those, not in the articles and not in every class meeting, but I try to make a point of hitting as much of these as possible, at least identifying that that this is Roman, and they spoke Latin, and we looked at things like aqueduct, and what does that mean in Latin? It means water carrier, or thing that pulls water, etc. Just stuff like that. Performing arts, we don't get into that much, but we have looked at a little bit of Greek theater, and we've seen venues for performing arts. And in Roman times, that kind of falls into the simultaneously with entertainment. There's a lot of overlap there, but we see the amphitheaters, we see the Colosseum, we see the Circus Maximus, and so on. Philosophy, religion, visual arts, and visual arts is really the category that this class, this is the overarching concern. But we also hit a lot of other areas in social sciences, for example. Cultural and ethnic studies. Well, that's like huge. You have to kind of know what the civilization was like in Egypt to understand the mummies, the pyramids, the tombs, et cetera, et cetera. Geography, always start off with geography. That's the first illustration in every chapter of this book. Gives you a place where this happened, and it'll give you a date range too. It'll say the Roman Empire, mid-2nd century, or something like that. Political science, always an issue. We talked about the Roman Republic versus the Roman Empire. That's like smack dab in political science, because they changed their government, they changed the way that they govern themselves, and more or less they ended up governing much of the Western world at the time. Psychology, I want to talk a little bit about that today because we're going to go look at some Roman sculpture. And that is a characteristic of Hellenistic Greek sculpture and Roman sculpture. I'll show you why. Sociology, obviously, the class systems and things, and the sciences, chemistry, physics, earth sciences, space sciences. A lot of not a lot, but some of what you guys wrote about was some of the findings of these sites, such as the Sphinx, the pyramid, the Acropolis, using satellite technology and image analysis. And so physics always has everything. We got formal sciences, mathematics. The Parthenon is like a case study in mathematics. Its geometry is flawless. That's what kind of makes it one of the wonders, aside from the beauty of this building, how they took into account how people would see this, and our vision is not entirely exactly perfect. Human vision is flawed. Bottom line, they adjusted the shapes of the columns and slope of the floor to account for that. I do. Logic, mathematics, statistics. We didn't get too much into statistics, but I wrote something on Facebook about maybe almost a year ago. And it had to do with statistics. Statistics was, we had a discussion at my former university, Truman State, and whether or not to require statistics as a core required subject. And we finally said yes. There were a lot of people against that. But what I wrote on Facebook was, I was so glad we decided to make statistics part of the curriculum, because you know why? Give you one guess. COVID. And that's really a lot of the problems in dealing with this pandemic, is that, and this is just my opinion, but a lot of the people that are doing the research and the people that are trying to give the guidance and people that are developing the vaccines and talking about masks and all of this other stuff, they give you statistics. And that's to a fault. They talk about this in statistics. I just saw one just a little while ago. Johnson & Johnson wants to ask for a booster shot for their vaccine. And they said that after getting a booster shot, the effective rate goes up from 74% to 94%. Well, if you know statistics, this is like really pretty big. But I see people all of the time that are saying, well, even if you get a vaccine, you could still get COVID. Well, that's because I don't understand the statistics. And a lot of the people generating the statistics are not talking in plain English. Okay, that's my rant for today. Bottom line, agriculture, we talk about that actually, I think, quite a bit in here, because we see agriculture depicted in so much of the artwork, from Mesopotamia to Egypt, somewhat in Greece, not so much. We'll see it come back again a little bit in Roman art, but agriculture actually hits another Another discipline here, I'm trying to find it here, economics. Because the prosperity of the people really depends largely on whether they can feed the people. And so how many times we see people herding sheep, goats, cows, or harvesting wheat. It's all over Egyptian art and it's all over Mesopotamian art. And then we could actually go back and talk about some of the physical sciences and agriculture, which is one of the applied professions. Agriculture, how they were able to flood their fields with water from the Nile. They put canals in and they would lift up the barrier and they flood the fields and put it back. Anyway, those are disciplines. So that's really what I wanted to talk about today. A field of study. And so not every subject is a field of study. But anyway, let's go back to this screen share. And so I got some examples here I wanted to share with you. And sometimes this is from a student's, one of the responses, paragraph 2. Maryville Library offers many articles on the Hatshepsut mortuary temple based on the search in the library. The article describes connections of Hatshepsut's temple in Egypt. One of the articles I found mentioned Hatshepsut has a connection with Egypt, which should be Egyptian, but religion. And I just highlighted these. Gender. If I go back to the list of disciplines, I didn't talk about area studies, which can be a discipline. And it would be ethnic or cultural studies. But we also break these things down today, and it's academic disciplines. Gender studies, women's studies, African studies. We have a ton of academic disciplines that are kind of limited either to a geographic region or the people from that geographic region or of a particular culture. So anyway, architecture, we saw that. Gender, relief, and religion. One thing I didn't understand here in this answer was relief, but I'm thinking what they were talking about is the relief sculptures inside the funerary mortuary. And that is that low relief sculpture that's so common in antiquity and survives today. So that's, I think, what relief, but I thought this was good. I was like, hey, I'm going to show you guys. Here's another one that had listed a number of disciplines. Archaeologist, Egyptologist, geologist, and this is talking about the Great Sphinx of Giza. The nearby city of Cairo has water vapor which forms into nitric and sulfuric acid, which in turn turns into acid rain. Well, that, I want to put a title on that. What discipline would that be? Yeah, it could be, but chemistry is huge. It could be an area study too, out of subgroup of chemistry, environmental studies. And so we know about that. We talk about environmental studies all of the time, the carbon footprint and so on. And I wanted to add this. this is so totally true. A lot of the buildings from antiquity have been slowly crumbling before our eyes because of this particular problem, acid rain. And if you ever see a video of, say, the Colosseum, you can drive right around the Colosseum, and every time you see it, you see cars driving around it. It's right in the middle of town. Likewise, it says here about the Great Sphinx being damaged. Paris, Notre Dame, a lot of places. So anyway, here is one that's that kind of hit all of 3 questions quite well. And I just want to pick out some of the highlights here: religion, history, mathematics. And it talks about the Greek victory over the Persians, which is history itself, like it says, but you could also talk about that as political history too, because whoever rules politics is government. And so anyway, Pythagoras, who heavily believed in beauty residing in fixed proportions, ratios, mathematical formulas. So true. And that's why we'll talk about the Parthenon as being like really so special, partly because we even know the people who had the theories, the mathematicians. We know who the mathematicians were in a way that we don't really know that from Egypt. Again, in Mesopotamia, they kept their math to themselves. It was kind of a trade secret, if you will. But we know that about the Greeks, and for the Greeks, mathematics was almost a religion in their culture. They really believed that mathematics could explain a lot of things. They were among the first to realize the earth was round, even though that knowledge got lost for a few centuries, but they understood it. In fact, we got the maps that show what they knew, and it looks like a modern map. Anyway, and so because of this, the final product was deemed architecturally perfect. And so anyway, the article, the Parthenon and liberal education. That is such a true statement. I could not agree more. Because a liberal education does not really so much focus on one discipline or one area of study, but that's why we have what you call a core curriculum. That's a liberal education idea, that everybody should know a little bit of language, art, history, math, science, and so on. And so that's it. And I need to get back to the share. Not there. Here. And I think this one will get me there. Share. No, not where I want to be. But if I can end the show. Any questions? All right, guys at home, I'm getting the screen share up. Share screen. Share. Slideshow from beginning. There we go. Let me see if I still have that share. Oh, there we go. Wait. This is what. Good. So anyway, no questions. I'd like to talk a little bit about Roman painting and sculpture. And we have a lot of examples of Roman painting from Pompeii. And this is one of them. And I've talked to you guys about this last time, showing you the amphitheater, which had gladiator battles in it and so on. And so from the painting, we kind of know a lot about the culture, but I want to talk about some of the distinctions in Roman painting. And so basically this is still Roman Republic. And you can't really tell this. They have what they call 4 styles of Roman painting. You can't tell much about this other than the fact that what they did with this painting is paint panels on the wall. And so it really wasn't a mural, it was, if you will, more like a graphic novel or a museum where you'd have different scenes painted. And here's the second style, which is kind of more like what we're accustomed to. And it's very much like the Greek paintings that we know of. And so anyway, with this, Dionysiac, which is after Dionysus, Greek god of pleasure, Greek god, he was the party god. His brother Apollo was the straight guy. One was about emotional gratification. The other was about intellectual prowess. And so anyway, but this is about that. And, you know, Dionysus would have orgies and stuff and drunken brawls, and, you know, it was all about that. And so you can see that's what's going on here. People are half dressed and they're drinking. Anyway, but the style of it is kind of like the Greek style. And so I put this up as a starred piece because I wanted you to see this. And to me, this blows my mind. And I can tell you why. Unlike, you know, the other paintings, they kind of give a idea of depth, 3-dimensional space on a 2-dimensional surface, but they're still in a lot of ways kind of flat. They do landscapes, we'll see that. I just showed you Dionysus. And that was all kind of 3-dimensional, but the space was kind of narrow. And one of the things that we track, at least in the history of painting, is how well, this is a Western thing, if you will, how well we create an illusion of 3-dimensional space on a 2-dimensional surface. That is, how deep is it? And so when you see paintings, say, from the Renaissance, the Mona Lisa, and she's sitting there, and then you look over her shoulders, and you see this faraway landscape, And it's a fantastic landscape. It's mountains. You see, it goes way back, probably for miles. The idea of portraying depth is something that we look at, and it is a benchmark for how accomplished the painters are. There are other metrics and there are other reasons that paintings are great, but one of them we look at is the depth, in the same way that we look at naturalism in sculpture. And so anyway, this, look, it's look at these lines here, the roof lines and the column. Who's in art? You know what that's called? Tell me. I'm old. I forget words. Who are you guys? Why are you looking at me? What? Perspective. Who said that? Yes, absolutely. Perspective lines. And so that's something that they reinvented during Italian Renaissance times. But this is perspective. And this is 2,000 plus years old. And so, yeah, that's really what blew my mind about this. They're showing actual linear perspective. And there are different ways you can make the illusion of depth. One is overlapping, and that's kind of the simplest of them. But when you start talking about linear perspective, that's a whole different ballgame. And so that's why I put the star by it, and you can see it's as though the columns exist outside of this space, and we have a wall, a half wall, and portals or windows, if you will, to see the space outside, done in linear perspective, which, as I was talking about Mona Lisa, there's this deep space behind there. I notice it like, look at this. Circa 50 to 40 BCE. So this is after Pompeii, by the way, which was 79 BCE. Wait, no, 79. Yeah, hey, bottom line. I wanted to show you this. Have you seen this? You guys go to Cardinals games, drive on 40. You're going downtown. This is Highway 40. It's got the over and under lanes. This was the Edison Brothers stores distribution center. And Edison Brothers actually made electronic stuff, radios and stuff. But anyway, it went out of business as an arcade thing. Sheridan Hotels bought the building, made a hotel out of it, and they had this guy, Richard Haas. He's kind of a well-known artist, has painted this kind of stuff all over the country and all over the world. And so what this is about, it's basically the same kind of thing I was showing you in that second style painting. Republican Rome. And you got this, and you got this, a statue of St. Louis. Same guy you can see by the Art Museum. Got the column and the globe and all of this stuff. And I want to point out to you this. You see these on the side? What are those called again? Obelisk from Egypt. Anyway, it's all done. It's kind of a revival, Greco-Roman, Renaissance kind of stuff. But at any rate, the ideas still persist. And, you know, Haas does a couple of other things that are kind of tricky. I think, and that is that he paints the shadow behind it, and likewise on St. Louis over here. So it kind of adds to the idea of three-dimensional space. But you see, we're seeing a lot of that same thing going on right here. And so this is a gardenscape second style, which is kind of like the Dionysian painting all the way around the room. And this slide is so bad, I don't know why they have it in here. But fourth style. And this, if you take a look at some of these paintings, they almost look like Renaissance or neoclassical paintings from more modern times. But again, like the other first style paintings I was showing you, the idea of painting walls as though they have paintings hanging on those walls, like you're at a museum or something. And that's what they did, but you can see there's a lot of naturalism, there's some degree of depth and so on. Mosaic. This is something that the Romans get involved with in a pretty major way. They do mosaics, and this will last for hundreds of years. We'll see some great mosaics, Roman influenced mosaics in all over the Middle East. Mosaics and their influence far outlast Roman Empire itself. We'll talk about that later, but the idea still the same. And you see, they're trying to do some of the same things, or at least it seems like they're trying to create the space. Mosaics, they don't lend themselves quite that well to the illusion of three-dimensional space. You have any idea why? This is like a real in the weeds art question. Because the tiles, the pebbles, the shells, or whatever the mosaic is made of, actually bring more attention to the surface of this artwork. It's hard to see a mosaic without seeing the surface. And if you want to create a believable illusion of space and depth, you almost need that surface to dissolve. You gotta fool the eye enough to forget that it's even there. And so anyway, but you can see they were pretty skilled at this too. And this is a husband and wife portrait. And you see, this is from Pompeii, Italy, 79 CE. This is the kind of paintings we find in Pompeii. And I wanna move up ahead in this slide presentation because there is some painting later on in this chapter that I want to bring your attention to. Oh, I want to show you this. This is a mosaic, by the way, and you can see it's quite flat. Nevertheless, impressive, but here, mummy case of Artemidorus from Hawara, Egypt, 100, 120, Common Era. And I don't know how much I emphasize this, but I can't emphasize it enough. And that is that when the Romans conquered their armies went and they conquered much of what was the known world. We know that they couldn't break into modern day Germany. Those guys were, it was too forested, they were too strong. We know that they couldn't extend like into Asia, that was too far away. But they did get much of the Middle East and so on, and North Africa, and most of Western Europe. Anyway, that being said, when they conquered these places, they also sent Romans out to live in those places. And so soldiers would bring their wives, their children. The government officials would have their families with them, and Egyptians, and Egypt was one of those places that was under Roman occupation, as well as Greece, as well as Mesopotamia for that matter. But they sent their own people. And so one of the things that happened, well, happened in a lot of places, but it was especially pronounced in Egypt, is that the Romans that were there in Egypt started to adopt some of the cultural practices and some of the traditions of the Egyptians themselves. And so what we find in Egypt at this time is that these Romans they're burying themselves, they're dead, in the same way that the Egyptians had. That is, that they mummified the corpses and they put them in this casket. And so anyway, the difference being is that you have this Roman portrait there at the head of this. But the rest of it, look at it, it's right out of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, with an Anubis carrying the corpse and the judgment on this person's soul, whether or not they'll go to heaven or be in the afterlife. And so this is like, it's almost like half Roman and half Egyptian. Astonishing. And so here's another one here too. This is the mummy portrait of a young woman. Same place. And so this was really kind of an interesting thing, because a lot of these Roman mummies and mummy caskets were found at a place like Hawara, which was a little off the beaten path. Wasn't like it was at Giza, it wasn't from the Valley of the Kings or from the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut. Was kind of in a different place. And these are relatively new discoveries. And they didn't know what to make of them when they found them. We had these portraits on these mummies and their caskets. So anyway, yeah. And so there's another mummy portrait of a priest, Hawara, Egypt. And so anyway, I want you to kind of think about this too. What we're starting to see in this 2nd century is a little bit of a move away from that naturalism and a little bit more towards symbolism. You'll see that the eyes are usually like really big. See? And so there's still, you probably still recognize these people. We're starting to move away from traditional practice. And so that is what I wanted to show you about painting. And I want to show you, before we go, about sculpture. Oh, wait. I do want to show you a little bit more painting. I want to finish that with this. still life with peaches. And so this is early Imperial Rome. And as I was talking about naturalism, this is a pretty, I think, a pretty fair attempt at naturalism. And especially when you talk about a glass vase of water and fruit. This almost looks like it comes out of 1600s in Northern Europe. Of course, again, we're talking about a culture that highly influences those later cultures in Europe. But how many of you artists ever try to paint or draw water in a glass? No, I mean just the image of this. Yeah, can you, I'll zoom in on it. Can you see that better? Well, one of the things that's really hard about it, very difficult to do, and that is that it has this shine, and the light hits the surface of this vessel and it goes through this vessel. And so trying to catch all of that light bouncing around, on top of which, if you're drawing or painting something that shines, if you move your head just a little bit, the shine looks different. So you got to really, really concentrate. So anyway, I thought this was quite, in its own way, remarkable for that reason. It's kind of stuff that a drawing teacher would assign. And so anyway, again, I was talking about the move away from the naturalism. This is 200 Common Era. And again, these are kind of a little bit more stylized. And we're talking about the big eyes and the features, and it's relatively flat and so on. And so I want to talk about the sculpture of Republican and Imperial Rome. And so this is early Imperial Rome. Funeral relief with portrait from the Jessii. And we're not exactly sure, but zoom in on this here too. What are the things that starts to happen with Roman sculpture versus Greek sculpture? Greek sculpture was based on, especially classical Greek sculpture, was based on the ideal. I just read you somebody's writing here about the perfect, geometrically perfect building, the Parthenon. And they were really into a lot of things, perfection. And one of those things, absolutely, was the human figure. All of the muscles, everything you see, all of these people have like zero body fat, and they're good looking and all of this. And most of the time they don't show much emotion. It's really Apollonian in that way. But we start to see in Rome, they start moving towards a more emotional kind of depiction in their sculpture, and they also make sculptures or reliefs of more ordinary people, which is really kind of interesting. There's a Republican priest, 50-30 BCE. So this is not like ideal. He looks old. He looks thoughtful. He's got the thought lines. and the wrinkles on his face. And his head is not particularly perfectly symmetrical. Like for instance, I think this ear looks a little bigger than the other, for example. But that's how people are, you know, they're usually. And so they come up with a different idea about what they want to do in their painting and in their sculpture. And so we still have a lot of the remnants of classical Greek, and especially when you talk about a Roman general, we still got the zero body fat, but the head is kind of a little bit different. It's a little more thoughtful. It has a little bit more personality, if you will. Head of Pompey the Great. It's an emperor. See, what does he look like? Does he have? Can you tell what his emotional state is, or can you guess at it? Is he looking a little sanguine, a little like he's missing somebody, or quite a difference from that? A lot of the Egyptian and classical Greek sculptures of their rulers and their gods who were very stoic, with a few exceptions, like ADAH. But yeah, I'm starting to see this idea of the emotions coming through. I put this is a coin, denarius, and it's got a portrait of Caesar on it. And it's kind of, in a lot of ways, like a modern coin. It's kind of worse for the wearer. It's made of silver. And what I was finding interesting about this is the denarius. And there are still a lot of countries that their currency is called a dinar, D-I-N-A-R. A lot, and that comes right, that's been going on for 2,000 years, and that's right out of Rome. So interdisciplinary, we're talking about cultural, we're talking about economics, we're talking about language. Anyway, dinars, if you ever go travel, you'll see. And so here, man with Roman bust of his ancestors. And one of the things that we do find a lot of in Roman sculpture is that, they venerate their ancestors. It's not to the level of ancestor worship, but they venerate their ancestors, they commemorate them. And it's important, which is kind of an interesting idea. And but look at that guy's face. It's probably a lot more natural than it is ideal. And so here he has his ancestors, the bust of his ancestors. And the other thing I want to add too is that that's something that the Romans start doing a lot of too, is that they create busts, which is really a head, part of the shoulders, a little part of the chest. It's not a full body sculpture, but it's a bust, and this is what they look like. And so anyway, you can see they're pretty adept. The way that the drapery, the weight of the body, the anatomy, all of that is really pretty exceptionally good. But the whole focus is naturalism over idealism. And so the funerary issues, that's becomes real big. There's a funeral relief of the deceased. And you can see here, these are the people carrying the sarcophagus. Here is the sarcophagus, and I'm going to zoom in on this too because it's really kind of cool. That's not the person, that's not the dead person. This is left over from the Etruscans. Remember we saw their sarcophagi and they would put sculptures of the people buried in this casket, if you will. We're still doing that. It's an Etruscan thing. And so, anyway, and a lot of this, just the way the frieze is, the way the register looks, it's really out of earlier antiquity. We can go back to Mesopotamia and see scenes in some respects like this. Portrait of Augustus. I like this statue, and it is kind of more classical Greek, and it also has a cherub here, what we would call a Christian language cherub, and it's probably one of those third generation Greek gods like Hermes or somebody. But at any rate, accomplished. And it's a first century copy of a bronze original. Another thing that happens, we start seeing copies upon copies. Bust of Livia. The era of peace from Augustus, the altar of Augustine peace. Augustine was that first Roman emperor. He was the emperor at the time of Christ. And what we have here is a lot of commemorating what they call the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. The reason they had the Roman peace was that there was a central government over this broad area. And so the people weren't fighting in a tribal sort of way. The other thing is that wherever the Romans went, they seemed to try to keep the populations happy. It doesn't account for slavery and some of the other atrocities, but bottom line is that they built aqueducts to bring water to people. They built amphitheaters in places where they were so that the locals, among which were some Romans, could have entertainment and so on. And so this is the altar of Augustinian peace. Procession of the imperial family. This is from the altar of Augustine peace. And again, a lot more naturalism, and these people are individuals, and some of them say like, this guy, not particularly ideal, doesn't look like Denzel Washington, kind of look like an old guy. And so the kids, they look like kids that act like kids, that idea of naturalism. And the other part of this I want to point out is that this whole idea of size as indicating importance, that's not happening here. This is all to scale. The kids are to scale, the men, the women in the procession. There's not like a central figure that dominates. Naturalism. And so Vespasian, naturalism, not ideal. It's just a Flavian woman. We think that probably she was of importance, and you take a look at her hairstyle. Probably spent a lot of time at the salon. But again, naturalism over idealism. I talked to you guys about the arches and different kinds of funeral relief of an official in the Circus Maximus. And so one of the things that we find in a lot of this funerary sculpture is memorializing not emperors and generals, but oftentimes just ordinary people. And that is something that kind of is a characteristic of the Roman Republic. And when we take a look at Egypt and Mesopotamia and Greece for that matter, there's only a few examples we have of more ordinary people, not in that higher class, actually getting the sculptural memorial. We saw one from Egypt, the scribe, the seated scribe, ordinary guy, not a king. But that was kind of rare. And here we see all kinds of different there's another one here that I really want you to see. There he is. Funeral relief of a vegetable vendor. This is the guy who runs what is in essence the local grocery store. But they take the time because all of this, it requires effort and it requires an acknowledgement that these people were important enough to memorialize this way. And so we start to see a lot of things change. And in some ways, the Roman Empire and its subjects, especially the Romans themselves, actually enjoy a higher status as compared to people from other civilizations, egalitarian in that way. And so, it's 10 after. Another sarcophagus, Asiatic sarcophagus. Again, with the sculpture of the dead person on top of the casket. And I showed you these guys. Again, Trajan. Naturalism over idealism. And I was going to show you another PowerPoint about how this comes out of Hellenistic Greek art, but I think I'll save that for Thursday. Any questions? Enjoy this beautiful day. And if you haven't gotten quiz 2 or unlocked quiz 2, send it to me. Thank you.